that were experienced in the process of racial integration of the U.S. Armed Forces. Concerns about black men's limited motivations to fight and their lack of acceptance by white men were used to limit their military roles. Subsequently, these concerns were addressed by service programs aimed at achieving racial equality and interracial harmony. Similar efforts directed at achieving gender integration could be expected to ameliorate the problems women encounter. In conclusion, we find that major arguments against equality of treatment for men and women in our military do not hold up under the weight of evidence. The past 10 years have witnessed an unprecedented expansion in the proportion of women in our military forces. Despite repeated studies to establish the limits of our military women's capabilities, no such limitations have been demonstrated.
Thank you, Dr. Sagel, and thanks to the members of the panel. Mr. Kastenmeier?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I must say I think this hearing, Women in the Military, is timely since this administration has shown a disposition to employ military personnel in hostile situations and to incur casualties. So I would say that setting, the seriousness of this subject is apparent. I would ask, it was a long time ago since I served in the military, is it, and I guess I'm addressing this to Dr. Siegel, is it the present practice or procedure in the military as opposed to much earlier time in history to, on the intake of personnel, to grade them by strength, by psychological as well as mental intelligence testing, and by all the indicia which would enable them, irrespective of sex, to place personnel in particular jobs? Do you think, in other words, is the classification system currently sophisticated enough to enable the military to achieve what they need to achieve, irrespective of sex, with respect to classification?
The military services currently use several criteria, both for selection and the classification of personnel. They do use cognitive testing, which establishes not only an individual's general capability, but they can match performance on the test as an aptitude or ability in specific areas and job assignments, and they do indeed do that. They also have a measure of quality which includes educational requirements, which change depending upon manpower personnel needs. And the Air Force does currently have a physical strength requirement. Carolyn Beecraft may want to address that, but it is, some would consider it to be rather minimal in terms of a strength requirement. It is not a very strict standard, but all of the services are re-examining many of the selection criteria in terms of their relationship to job performance.
But it is your view that they should have sophisticated general testing which would indicate which personnel were qualified, irrespective of sex, for any job, combat infantry, naval aviation, or anything else?
Yes.
And this is perhaps a legal question, and maybe you're prepared to answer it, perhaps not, to any member of the panel, would the enactment of ERA necessarily achieve this, or will it depend on how it's construed? Will it require court tests, like you think, to achieve what you have in mind in terms of equality of women in the military?
The factors that I put forward in my testimony in terms of assertions of what I believe would be the result of ERA are there by me as an advocate and not as a constitutional scholar. My interpretation of what equality under the law would require in this area focuses on both the results that I would advocate and those that I realistically assess could actually come to pass. So while I don't have do not want to bring to the committee a precise constitutional doctrine. I know you'll be dealing with constitutional scholars down the line with that. I do assert as an advocate and as one who has, I think, assessed what the history has been in this area in terms of the military bumping up against various provisions of the Constitution, that indeed the explicit exclusionary policies, to the extent that they exclude and they are explicit, would indeed be addressed by the Equal Rights Amendment, and that neutral criteria, to the extent that they might disproportionately still exclude women, would have to be examined. And I guess my prediction would be that if Congress and the service branches do a careful job during the 2-year period after ratification to assure that the standards set by the military services are indeed based in fact and not in generalized assumptions or not in simply a cover for maintaining the gender-based exclusions, that they're going to be all right, that it would be very difficult for an advocate like myself to challenge them under those circumstances.
One last question I have, and it's not exactly related to service in the military, but to prospective service in the military, and that is registration for the draft. And a court suit, of course, as you well know, failed in this regard. Some of us joined in that court suit. Assuming that women were required to register for draft, in your view, would we see any more or any less or about the same compliance or non-compliance among women as among men? Are we merely doubling the number of non-compliers and those subject to very serious felony conviction by making women also subject to registration? And are they more or less likely, I guess my question is, to comply or not, or be out of compliance?
Well, because we haven't experienced that, I don't know that you can really say for sure, but I will point out that especially in World War II, as an example, that when the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor, women tried to enlist in droves, and that their participation has always been there when needed. I would expect that will continue.
Well, are you saying then that there would be fewer women out of compliance with registration?
I would think so, yes.
The other two, do you agree? I think there's a
I'm thinking of several
gender gap there.
This is a kind of educated guess in predicting into the future. We can look at a number of different pieces of evidence that might come up with a conclusion. One is that young women in general are more compliant than young men. They have lower rates of crime, for example. They have higher rates of graduating from high school, which is interpreted not so much that they're smarter, but that they're more likely to stick with it and less likely to drop out. On the other hand, it is true that the propensity to be in the military is clearly much more common among men than among women. And I don't think that I could predict what the rates of compliance would be. I suspect they would probably be about equal.
It was something we might think about. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Sensenbrenner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to use my 5 minutes first by making a comment and then asking a question. It seems that each of the panelists this morning are operating from the basic premise that the central issue is not whether the ERA will subject women to dangerous military service, but the impact of the regulations relative to the enlistment and assignment of military personnel in various branches of the service to do various tasks. I'm not so sure the American people agree with that basic premise, and I certainly don't agree with that basic premise. But the question that I would like to ask the panelists is this. It's my understanding that the state of Israel's defense forces, which certainly is a nation where legal discrimination against women is far less than in our nation, and the role model that women play is far more equal than in our nation.